The United States has reversed regulations on methane emissions from the oil and gas industry. Methane is a major contributor to global warming. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency said easing the 2016 rules would save energy companies up to $123 million over the next 5 years. The CBC's Carolyn Dunn joins us now live from Washington. So, Carolyn, what are the details?
Well, as we expected, the EPA is proposing that they ease the restrictions for the oil and gas industry on methane emissions. Basically, what it will mean if it comes to fruition is that the oil and gas industry will not be required to inspect and trap methane emissions, not by law anyway, either at pipelines, at the source of where they extract oil and gas, or where they store oil and gas and energy products. The EPA says easing these regulations is going to save the oil industry $18 to $19 million a year US. In a press release, EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler said EPA's proposal delivers on President Trump's executive order and removes unnecessary and duplicative regulatory burdens from the oil and gas industry. Now, they say that methane emissions have gone down 13 to 15% since 1990, even though the extraction of oil and gas has doubled in the same period. So they say that oil and gas companies will actually have an incentive to trap that methane anyway, because it may have a market value, at least during certain points in time. So they don't need the regulation. That's sort of the argument. Methane, of course, is second only to carbon dioxide as far as being a driver of climate change, causing about 10% of emissions. And the oil and gas industry in the United States is definitely methane's largest emitter.
Any indication how the reversal will be received?
Well, listen, environmental groups are definitely going to be taking this to court. They have already indicated that they are going to sue the administration to try and stop it. And it's interesting also that we're seeing in the oil and gas industry, not everyone is applauding this at all. There are some big companies like Shell, like BP, and they are basically saying that it kind of hurts their ability to market, particularly natural gas, as a clean burning fuel. And they would sort of like to see the status quo continue, and they will just continue with the efforts that they have been making to reduce their own methane emissions. They also say that, this could get caught up in court, as we have already heard from environmental groups for so many years, that even if they did have a bit of a financial boon from it, that might not happen for many, many years. So all of these people, for, against, and indifferent, are all going to have a chance to have their say over the next 60 days as the EPA holds a public comment period, basically. And obviously, this is just probably going to show the divides within the oil and gas industry and also between the administration.
Thank you. That is the CBC's Carolyn Dunn in Washington. Janet McCabe helped develop the methane emission guidelines at the EPA under President Obama. She is now a professor at the McKinney School of Law at Indiana University and joins me now. So, Professor McCabe, what is your reaction to this move?
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for covering this story. I think nobody should be surprised that this proposal has come out from EPA. It's another in a string of rules to roll back regulations, postpone regulations that are designed to protect public health. And that is, I think, the key thing that people need to keep in mind, that EPA is a public health agency. That is its mission. Its mission is not a regulatory relief agency. So I think that a lot of people are very concerned about this proposal because oil and gas production, which has been noted, and gas is considered a clean fuel, it pollutes a lot, and it pollutes a lot in the production chain. But there are very sensible ways to minimize that pollution that the 2016 rules set in place.
We know that although methane only accounts for roughly 10% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, its impact on climate change is immense. Can you explain that for us?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So different kinds of pollutants affect the climate differently. It's all kind of regulated to CO2, but methane is considered to be a more severe, it has higher potential to harm the planet than CO2 molecule per molecule. So even if there's less of it, its effect can be greater. And so this is why the oil and gas industry was, as EPA in the 2010 through, during the Obama administration, looked at which were the most harmful industries in terms of their emissions. Motor vehicles was right up there, fossil fuel energy generation was right up there, and then production of oil and gas through its methane emissions was next.
So ultimately, why do you think President Trump has decided to relax these rules, given that some of the oil and gas companies weren't even really asking for this?
Right. Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I think there are two reasons that were reflected in two of his early executive orders. One is regulatory relief. So the agencies have been directed to find every regulation that they could possibly roll back. And number two was his executive order on energy independence and amping up the development of fossil energy sources in this country. And oil and gas certainly is doing that. So you've got those two pushes from the administration, and those have come into conflict with some of the very industries. The motor vehicle industry, same way. Not all the automakers want the clean car rules to be weakened. And we're seeing here that many in industry do not want to see these rules change. And I would say that that's for two reasons, at least two primary reasons. One is that industries like regulatory certainty. I've worked in this field for decades, and that is the most important thing that industries say they want. Just tell us what the rules are, and then don't change them every 2 minutes. So this proposal is injecting huge uncertainty into the system. And you have many industries who are using these technologies, want their industries to be seen as non-polluting, and having regulations in place helps provide some certainty to the American public that the industry is developing these important resources in a responsible way. So yes, you have industries coming to the White House saying, please don't do this. We're prepared to go forward. And they want everybody else in the industry to be doing the same thing.
So what kind of impact could this rollback have on an emissions deal, say, between the U.S. and Canada?
Well, it shows, again, a huge lack of commitment by this country to be putting in place programs that will require emissions reductions, and it's consistent with the president's statements on the Paris Accord. The United States, huge producer of greenhouse gases, very hard for us to stand on a high horse and say that we need to deal with climate change emissions if we're not willing to do the same. But of course, you have an administration that's not acknowledging that climate change is a huge public policy issue that needs to be addressed.
Janet McCabe, thank you. Janet McCabe in Bloomington, Indiana. She was an administrator at the EPA under President Barack Obama.